Days went by, and it was finally time for the military results to be released. Landon had decided that there would be no classes today for those who took the exams previously. At 9 a.m., the test papers, evaluation papers for each physical test, as well as a midterm report card for each individual, would be tied together with rubber bands and handed to the recruits. The recruits were to go to the training field and wait for their papers there. Today, Mustafa, Michael, and their friends were lost in thought as they did their early morning training routine. Ever since Michael won Mustafa during the physical combat exam, they had become close. Since Michael's dormitory room was just 2 dorms away from Mustafa, they would gist in each other's dormitories before lights out. At 8:40 a.m., they had already hurriedly eaten their breakfast and were currently making their way back to the training fields. Once they got there, they saw several other students waiting anxiously as well. Someone waved at them from the front of the field, and they made their way towards the person. "Good thing you guys came now rather than later. Or else, even if I had called you guys by over, there would have been no space for you all to pass through to the front," Solomon said. Solomon was also one of their many new friends. Everyone around them started speaking to them as they waited. "I'm so nervous. I can't wait for the results. What if I fail this midterm? When I remember the exam, I feel like crying. There were some questions that I truly didn't feel confident about." "Bro, you're not the only one. I lost a match in the combat examination," Mustafa said. "Me too. For me it was the gun shooting examination. I couldn't run and shoot properly. So at 9 a.m. we'll receive all the papers for the exams?" "Yes, all the written papers, as well as different papers on the physical examinations. I think it'll also let us to know how we were graded in each physical exam." "Yeah, I want to know how they gave us our scores, so I can prepare for the next exam as well. Didn't you remember that His Highness said that no 2 exams would be the same? Look, the warrant officers have arrived." There were at least 4 warrant officers handing out exam papers for each letter of the alphabet. Mustafa stood around the warrant officers that were handing out papers to those whose names started with M. "Mustafa Cannon, present." He quickly dashed through the crowd and took his papers from the officer. All his exam papers were already arranged and joined together with 4 rubber bands. As he was too nervous to take a look, he decided to wait for Solomon and Michael to get their papers first. The first paper on the stack in his hand just had their names and military matriculation numbers written boldly with pen. Hence, he hadn't been able to guess what scores they had gotten so far. The first paper was more like a cover page for the other exam papers. For Mustafa, the cover page just had a military midterm examination results. Mustafa Cannon, a matriculation number 00000514. Authorized by His Majesty Landon Barn and General of the Army Lucius. A Landon's and Lucius signatures. August 17th, year 1024. Speaking of dates, ever since Landon had come to this world, a lot of things shocked him. Especially the fact that these people somehow called months the same way he did back on Earth. Right now, calendars already existed, but they were just not put down on paper. Every city, town, or village had a group of people that were in charge of dates. There were buildings that were built just for date recording. Stone buildings, stone tablets, or stones were generally preferred. For example, in Baymard, every morning, someone would come up to the abandoned stone building at the entrance of the upper region and use a sharp stone to place a straight stroke under the month name on the building wall. The first floor of the entire building had already been completely marked, as they had been using this building throughout the years. It was kind of cool. It looked like those ancient Egyptian markings in the pyramids. In places without stone buildings, large stone rocks would be cleaned and smoothed out to form stone tablets. The people would then place several strokes on the tablets as the days went by. These stone tablets were always placed in a safe public area where all could see. Back on Earth, Europeans came up with the calendars in the 10th century as well. But the Egyptians were different. The Egyptians had already come up with calendars ages before the Europeans. The Egyptians were just too advanced for the world. In fact, they had left the Europeans in the dust. In fact, Egyptians and Asians were also advanced as well, especially the Chinese. They were one of the first people to use sundials to tell the time and so on. Like Earth, Hertphilia had different continents that probably had different cultures as well. Who knows if there was already another continent right now that had already advanced in development like the Egyptians or the Chinese. Although he had compared Hertphilia with Earth here and there, Hertphilia had some areas that were more advanced when compared to Earth in the 10th century. Some things were similar to Earth, but not all things. This was a brand new world with its own practices and its own traditions. For some reason, their ship-making game was on point. It was more sturdier than that of Earth in the 10th century. Once Mustafa and his friends had collected their papers, they sat on the grass and looked at their results. The warrant officers had said that the only thing that they were allowed to keep was their report card paper. When they were done checking their papers, they were to return them back. No one was allowed to take the other papers away. "Okay, guys, let's open them together." 1, 2, 3-inch Solomon said. They immediately took off the rubber bands and removed the cover pages. The first sheet after the cover page was a report card that showed them all their results. "Ah, I passed." "Me too." "Ha ha ha, me too." They continued looking through all the other papers, so as to understand how they were graded. Mustafa looked at his physical combat score and was shocked. He opened his eyeballs widely and even thought that his mind was playing tricks on him. "Eh, I passed the combat exam." Michael and Solomon were shocked. "What did you say?" "Quickly, let's look at how our combat papers were graded." "Ah, I see. I scored higher for perseverance, bravery, and combat knowledge. Hee hee. But of course I had a 2/10 for task completion." "So they check several things when accessing us?" "It looks like it." "Oh." "They even told me how to correct my stand for the backward kick move." "So they also give advice on these evaluation papers?" "Ha ha ha. I don't care. I'm so happy right now. Let's go buy food at the market square." "I second that." They quickly binded all their papers back with the rubber bands, excluding their report card paper, and handed them back to the warrant officers. Celebration time. Today was the 19th of August, and only 12 days were left before the month ended. Right now, there were currently 5,200 men who were assigned to construct these sites, 1,000 men who were building the greenhouse, and 6,000 workers who were doing road construction in the District E. So far, only the water and sewage plant, as well as the power plant, have been completed, while the central heating plant was only 98% done, as the workers were still installing essential fixtures like sinks to all buildings on the site. Since the first two plants were done, Landon decided to start teaching the men how to operate both plants, as well as assign some workers to start placing underground electrical wires from the power plant to District E. For the 5,200 men who were previously assigned at the construction sites, Landon divided them up like so. A 1,000 workers to complete construction on the central heating plant. A 700 workers to operate the water and sewage plant. A 500 workers to operate the power plant. And 3,000 workers to place electrical cables alongside the roads. These new industries basically needed chemical engineers, alchemists, electrical engineers, and so on. Hence, Landon requested that some of the electrical engineers in training should be placed in each site, as well as some of the alchemists who would be trained to chemical engineers. On the other hand, the mechanical and civil engineers would definitely come from the construction workers whom he had assigned to the plants. Chief Tim and Chief Wiggins were also to appoint supervisors for every sector within these plants. For example, in the water and sewage plant, after the water leaves the sea and travels through the pipes, it would go to a 300-square-foot building. This building has different equipments used for filtering out any sand particles or hard rocks from the water, as well fishes that made their way to the building. In that stage of water processing, Landon wanted 2 supervisors in charge of all mechanical and chemical processes involved within the building. They were to supervise all activities taking place in that building before the water leaves and goes to the next processing stage. Although Landon needed guards and cooks within these plants, he didn't want to assign any just yet, at least until September. For now, the men would still have their food brought into Sector 1 by trucks. Landon decided that for these first 4 days, he would alternate between both plants. Today, he would only be teaching the workers in the power plant how to operate the plant. And the next day, he would do the same for those assigned to the water and sewage treatment plant. Landon decided to use this 4 days to give them an intense theoretical lecture on both plants. And for the remaining 8 days, all the workers from both plants would officially start their training. Within this 8-day period, Landon had decided that he would spend his mornings in the power plant, and for the afternoons, he would spend it within the water and sewage treatment plant. Early in the morning, the selected workers jumped into the trucks and headed out to their new work sites. Today was their first theory class in the plant. Once the workers who had never been to the construction site before stepped onto the first sector, they were utterly shocked. They felt like they had just stepped into another world. At the front of the sector was a large cemented block that had different words carved on it. The words read, Banished Power Plant. The block was standing on another platform that was surrounded by a massive pond, and around the pond was a small field of grass. Basically, the large words were on a fountain. The beautiful, smooth and black roads made the fountain look like a roundabout with several roads going towards different locations within the first sector. In this sector, there weren't many buildings since most plant activity happens in the second sector. This sector would mostly be used for the business side of the plant, as well as house the plant clinic, security offices, and so on. The buildings here were fully cemented and went as high as 4 or 5 stories, with the exception of 2 large ones that were both 3 stories high and covered with only bluish glass walls. These 2 glass wall buildings were connected together on their second floors by what looked like a glass bridge. As the trucks drove by, the workers looked around excitedly like tourists. Wah! Look at that building. Oh my heavens! Buildings can be built like this. Look at that large glass door at its entrance. The workers weren't the only ones stunned silly. Chief Wiggins was really having a hard time believing what he saw. Once again, the way he looked at Landon had completely changed. In his mind, Landon's title had now been changed from Messenger of God to God of Knowledge. Although Chief Tim had seen the plant during construction, he couldn't help but be amazed when looking at the end result. As both overseers looked around, they couldn't help but wonder when their own estates would be renovated. The workers really wanted to have a tour of the first sector. But sadly, Landon had the drivers drive straight to the next sector. Landon had promised them that once all 3 sites were up and running, he would give them a grand official tour. For now, all these buildings were locked, and their keys were placed on Landon's desks, as well as Chief Tim's desk. The only buildings that were open right now were those in Sector 2. These few days left, as well as the entire month of September, was their training period. Hence, only by completing their training would they truly belong to the plant. Plus, by the end of September, they would all get their badges and work identity cards for access within the plants. Once the men arrived at the second sector, Landon began his lecture. 7 days had gone by, and both plants now shared electricity and water between them. At this point, the central heating plant was completed. Hence, Landon kept 500 workers to operate the plant and sent the other 500 to aid in installing underground cables along the roads. And just like that, the last day of August had arrived. As for the workers, they now felt a little more confident in their plant operation skills and knowledge. Granted, they made a lot of errors on their first few days, but Landon had expected as much. Hence, he wasn't worried about their learning pace. After all, they still had the whole September to brush up their skills. When it concerned learning, no matter how many years one spent in school, nothing could compare to actually doing the procedures. One could spend 4 years studying chemical engineering, but that didn't mean that if that same person went to an oil plant, that person would automatically know what to do. Knowledge without practice was useless on the field. Back on Earth, there were people who had never gone to school before, but they could fix any machine, car, or engine, just because they had been taught on the job. And even those who had spent 10 years working on oil plants didn't know everything about their jobs. While on the job, new problems would definitely arise daily, making every day different from the next. It was impossible to know everything at once. In schools, people would sometimes cram a lot of information just so that they could graduate. That was why practice was important, as well as schooling. Both went hand in hand. So he had first spent his time teaching them the theory, before showing them how the plant actually operated. Right now, Landon didn't need them to know everything. He just needed them to learn at their own pace and safely operate the plant. The more they did, the more they would remember. I mean, he couldn't possibly put them through 4 years of schooling before finally allowing them to work on the plants, could he? The only way was to learn on the job. As for the workers, they truly liked their new work environment, especially because they could use the toilet, soap, and tissue paper. And don't get them started on the magical light tubes that shines brightly at night when they pulled the tiny switch upwards. These plant sites were like heaven to them. Right now, they all had one question in mind. When was their king going to start residential construction? September was here, and once again, Santa had sent his subordinates to Baymard as usual. Landon bought several seeds and animals, as well as sold his ores to Santa's subordinates. After he had sorted out the children, new military recruits, caretakers, and the elderly, Landon was left with 5,970 new workers, 100 hospital recruits, and 23 people who had professions prior to being slaves or refugees. Amongst those 23 people were 7 teachers, 10 healers, nurses, and 6 new doctors. Of course, Landon immediately assigned the doctors to start training under Dr. Gerson. As for the nurses, they were to join the new 100 hospital recruits and start training under nurses Chanel and Laura. Last month, Landon had added 100 trainees in the hospital, and this month, he had also added another 100 as well. The hospitals ran for 24 hours every day of the week, so more people were needed for different shifts. As for the teachers, Landon would use this September to train them. Although this was the last semester before the long holiday, Landon hoped that by October, these new teachers would begin teaching. It would be wise for them to use the remaining half of the semester as part of their training. Hence, Landon decided to let them teach courses like Pino 1 and Math 1. This month, there were a lot of things that Baymard needed. Firstly, Landon wanted to start making printing presses. He chose to make lithography steam engine rotatory printing presses. These steam engine printing presses were deemed the fastest that could work without electricity throughout ancient times. These ones could print both sides of a page in a single operation, at an incredible speed as well. One steam press alone could print over 200 book pages a day, provided water was constantly fed to the engine, as well as a constant supply of ink. Since he couldn't make digital printers right now, rotary printing presses would have to do. Once the printing press could run, I.D cards, government documents, and calendars were a must. Up next, Landon wanted to focus on mattress making. He wanted to make 2 types of mattresses: polyurethane foam mattresses and memory foam mattresses. Memory foam mattresses were actually made from the polyurethane ones. The only difference between the two were the additives used for making memory foam. Both foams could be made to feel hard, flexible, or even super soft, depending on whether they would be used in mattresses, pillows, wheelchair seats, bench and couch cushions, car seats, dishwashing sponges, gym mats, and so on. Polyurethane foam is generally formed when a polyol and an isocyanate are combined. Once combined, the foam starts forming and rising on its own at standard atmosphere pressure. The foam starts rising like how yeast would rise in dough and quickly solidifies itself, hence making the soft, flexible, and comfortable material used for mattresses and other cushions. For memory foam, both chemicals used for polyurethane foam are added, along with water and a variety of catalyst and additives. Also, depending on the different chemicals used, these foams could have different colors as well, like the yellow foam used for dishwashing sponges or the white foam used for mattresses. Finally, Landon wanted to focus on textile making. He knew that during this period, he would focus on all textile materials, except cotton. Since June, Landon had been buying cotton seeds from Santa's subordinates. Generally, cotton grew as a shrub, with the plant taking 5 to 6 months to fully grow and produce cotton. Since he couldn't wait for that long, he decided to focus on wool, yarn, and all other textile materials. For the past 2 months, the workers had been cutting and storing the fur from the animals which he had been purchasing. And now it was finally time to create thread used in making different clothing items, such as blankets, winter jackets, winter hats, socks, curtains, and so on. Hence, with everything needed this September, Landon divided the 5,970 new workers like so. Alchemy Industry. Black Small Square Foam Department, 570. Black Small Square the other existing departments, 500. A food industry, 500. A textile industry, 500. A construction industry. Black Small Square Printing Press, 400. Black Small Square other existing departments, 600. Actual construction workers, 2,900. Since there were no available buildings within the construction industry, Landon decided to have the paper-making department share their 4-story building with the printing press. As for the textile industry, since the animals and their fur were being stored within the food industry, Landon thought that it would be wise to allow them to occupy 4 buildings within the food industry as well, at least until their own facility was built. Hence, he had also decided that since those 1,000 workers assigned to build the greenhouse were done, they might as well start constructing the textile industry now. For this new textile industry, Landon just wanted 8 buildings within it. And while construction is underway, those assigned towards textile making would do their jobs within the food industry. In this era, the people already knew how to spin and form textile thread for clothing. The difference was that all their clothing was handmade. So for this first week of September, Landon wanted those assigned to the textile industry to start making thread from all animal fur previously collected and stored. And while they were focusing on that, Department C6 of the construction industry was to make mechanical wheeler sewing machines and spinning wheels. Instead of using electricity, these machines used several pulley mechanisms and leg paddles to spin the threads and sew fabrics. With these machines, the workers would be more efficient when compared to hand sewing and stitching. And once the first week of September was over, Landon would then divide the workers into 2 groups. One group would focus on making thread, while the other would be focused on fabric making. For this textile industry, Landon decided to appoint Mrs. Sophia as overseer of the industry. Sophia was the wife of Chief Lior, and since both industries were basically sharing the same state, Landon decided to appoint her as overseer. Plus, she was the one who had previously aided Landon in sewing badges for the military recruits. So from now on, she would be known throughout Baymard as Chief or Overseer Sophia. And for the food industry, since the greenhouse was already constructed, Landon wanted the new workers to start planting and transferring several medical herbs from the farms to the greenhouse. With the addition of 2,900 construction workers, Landon now had 12,900 workers altogether. It was finally time to focus on building residential homes for the citizens. Landon divided the group up like so. It was finally time to focus on building residential homes for the citizens. Landon divided the group up like so. A 2,000 were to focus on installing electric cables alongside the roads. A 4,000 were to focus on tarring the roads, as well as installing all sewage, water, rainwater drainage, and central heating pipes underneath the ground. A 900 would also focus on using heavy machines to level the space for the residential buildings. And finally, 7,000 workers would focus on constructing homes for the citizens. Back on Earth, the only reason building homes took over 6 months was because of land surveying, getting land permits, getting architects to make blueprints, hiring contractors, lawyers, and so on. The actual construction process doesn't take that long at all, depending on the desired house size. Typically, 3 men could build a 2,900 square foot house within 11 weeks, 3 months, and 2 weeks. That's without working on Saturdays and Sundays. In Landon's case, he wanted to build a 2,400 square foot home using 27 men in each group. This would by far slim down the building time, and in about 1.5 weeks, 27 men would finish one residential building. And since there were 7,000 workers assigned to building the homes, there would be 259 groups made up of 27 workers. Hence, after 1.5 weeks, Landon expected to see at least 259 homes already constructed. Landon wanted them to do what they had previously done when they constructed all 3 industries at once. Once the workers had to wait for cement to harden during the foundation, floor, and wall stages, Landon expected them to start construction for other residential homes. So in that way, by the end of the 1.5 week time frame, each team would actually complete, or at least start 2 or more homes at once. Of course, Landon had made up his mind to also assist all these industries within this month, especially the textile industry. Once the day came to an end, Landon looked at his schedule for September and truly felt like crying. He was busy as hell. He had to supervise another military exam for the recruits that came during the month of June. It had been 3 months for those recruits, and now was the period for their first official exam. Hence his presence as king was a must. Apart from aiding the industries and making his presence known in the military, Landon also had to visit the hospitals, nurseries, as well as the school. As he lay on his bed, Landon quickly tried his best to fall asleep fast, for he knew that tomorrow would be a long, weary day. Previously, during the month of August, Landon had allocated a large estate within the upper region to the medical volunteers. He decided to let the estate be a medical and healthcare academy. Medical care emphasized on disease treatment and care, while healthcare looked at signs, prevention of diseases, and health promotion and awareness. Generally, medical and healthcare had more than hundreds of different professions within it, from pharmacists to medical assistants, emergency medical technicians, cardiac surgeons, nutritionists, radiation therapists, and so on. In future, these students would have to specialize in particular areas and perform several operations and jobs within the hospital and clinics. For now, Landon had given them schedules which they had to follow strictly. They also had to attend the math, chemistry, and Pino classes being taught within Baymard. Chemistry was basically a main course for them. Understanding matter, chemical reactions that occur within the body, and chemical compositions within medical drugs was a necessity. Right now, 100 volunteers had also joined the academy within this month, making a total of 200 students. For their schedules, aside from math, Pino, and chemistry, the students also took a first aid classes, a wound care and treatment classes, a medical rules and ethics classes, a medical massage therapy classes, patient care, management and recording classes, patient communication classes, a disease management and treatment classes, and finally, hospital time, where different groups of students would spend 3.5 hours in the hospital aiding the nurses and doctors. With the schedule that Landon had made, on a daily basis the hospital had students who came over and took care of the patients, under the supervision of the nurses and doctors. The students also did hospital rounds, comforted the patients, and did other medical tasks. In this way, they were learning and practicing at the same time. Today, Nurse Chanel had 2 groups to supervise during her 8-hour shift. The first group of 15 students would come for 3.5 hours, while the other group would come after her lunch break. Once all the students from the first group had arrived at the front of the hospital, she began her roll call. Kenneth Carby, present. Gebo Jones, present. Undersir. As she called out their names, she used a blue pen to tick their names on the list that she was holding. Once roll call was done, she led them to the locker room that had spare lab coats, gloves, rubber shoes, hair caps, face masks, and so on. The students quickly wore the lab coats and shoes provided, as well as put their gloves and face masks in their lab coat pockets. Once everyone was done, they followed Nurse Chanel to her office for a 30-minute meeting. It was now 8:30 a.m., and Chanel's shift started at 9 a.m. The students were told to always come at least 35 minutes earlier. 2 days ago, your group came to the hospital and worked under me. We have been working together since the start of August, so you all know the drill. The seated students immediately took out their notebooks and pens as they waited for her questions. Patient Juliana in Ward B2 says that her tummy is constantly upset, her stomach feels like it's full of water, bloated. She vomits a lot, and her tummy aches as well. She also says that she always feels like going to relieve herself. She has a fever, and she passes out a lot of gas frequently. She also has trouble swallowing, always feels nauseous, and her stool is loose and watery. Causes. Go. The students raised their hands in attempt to give their hypotheses. It could be due to indigestion. She might have been used to eating food without drinking water. After all, from the lectures, indigestion is known to cause bloating, gas release, and deep aches and pains around the belly. Your answer could have been correct. But how do you explain the other symptoms? It could have also been diarrhea. All the symptoms match it well. Nurse Chanel smiled. Correct, the patient is indeed suffering from diarrhea. So what causes diarrhea? Allergies, lactose intolerance, food poisoning. Understood. All the possibilities listed down were in fact correct. But for this case, food poisoning was the main cause of the issue. In this era, people didn't have fridges and better ways to store food. Hence, they didn't know the meaning of expiration dates. For them, food was edible unless it was visibly rotten. These people would cook food and leave it outside for days while eating it. In fact, a lot of them died from food poisoning and had tummy aches frequently. For these people, it was normal to eat and have tummy aches, provided fever and sickness didn't take their lives. Even when their meat, bread, and other food items were molded, they would scrape away the molded parts and continue eating the foods. At least with the existence of plastic bags and containers in Baymard, the people could successfully cover their food from flies. But that still didn't change the fact that all food items would expire. Landon had taken his time to write books on basic hygiene and the causes, symptoms, and treatments of common problems that almost everyone back on Earth knew. He wrote about lactose intolerance, malaria, fever, the common flu or cold, rash treatments, sore throat pain, the importance of washing hands, and so on. Although he hadn't received the medical reward from the system, he wrote about these everyday illnesses based on what he knew. Landon was sure that everyone on Earth had gotten sore throat, fever, flu, headaches, tummy aches, and all the other easy illnesses at some point of their lives. Good. So since her diarrhea was caused by food poisoning, how do we solve it? Have her go on a clear liquid diet for 1 day, so that her upset stomach can settle down. Have her hydrate by drinking a lot of water regularly, letting her avoid milk and spicy foods. Having her drink a mixture of boiled ginger and water. This could reduce inflammation along the throat, as well as strengthen her stomach. Plus, ginger would also act as a good antibiotic. For her fever, nausea, and headache, we could also add featherfew, milkvetch root, and white peony root to the ginger water mixture. Nurse Chanel and the students discussed amongst themselves and came up with the perfect treatment for patient Juliana, as well as several other patients in the other wards. They had used 5 minutes to talk about each patient on Chanel's patient checklist. And after 30 minutes, it was time finally for her shift to begin. Chanel gave each person in the team specific duties for the day. Some were in charge of preparing and boiling all the medicines for all the patients on the roster, as per Chanel's instructions. Others were in charge of communicating with the patients about their illnesses, medication, and prevention of their sicknesses. Some also did therapy massages, wound treatments, and so on. Of course, before any medication was administered, Chanel was present to supervise the students. She was also the one that wrote in the patient's medical book as well. Each time the group came over to the hospital, their duties would change. This was done so that they would gain experience and understanding towards all medical procedures within the hospital. And just like that, by the end of the group's shift, Chanel had a 10-minute meeting with them on what they did right today, as well as their individual mistakes. As the group made their way out of the hospital, they kept discussing the events of the day amongst themselves excitedly. They loved the comments that they had gotten from the patients, as well as those from their supervisor, Nurse Chanel. Treating people's illnesses also made them have a sense of accomplishment. In their opinion, volunteering and choosing to be medical/healthcare students was the best decision that they had made throughout their entire lives. They had everything: money, food, housing, and job satisfaction. What more could they want? They were proud to be seen as future doctors and nurses of Baymard. Today, Landon had a meeting with the 3 government officials that previously came from the Empire of Yoden in May. Every week, Landon and the 3 men would write and revise all acts, policies, and regulations in Baymard. They had been writing these laws since May, and had only successfully finished writing them around mid-August. Back on Earth, all countries had more than hundreds of written policies for the citizens to follow. Landon and the 3 government officials, Nicholas, Craig, and Benazir, sat around a table and went through the several piles of papers. All the documents were categorized alphabetically from A to Z, and were also arranged according to their sectors. There were sectors like agriculture, beverages, fishery, citizenship and immigration, transportation, food preservation, schools, labor rights, minimum wages, construction, and environmental, as well as other sectors like natural resources, medical, engineering, law, military, parks, foreign affairs, trade, water bodies like ocean and streams, Baymard treasury, justice, tax, energy resources, public safety, and so on. In general, there were over 50 different sectors which had their own individual acts, policies, and regulations. It was impossible to write all these policies over a short period of time. Hence, Landon didn't want to address any government issues until they were done. Take, for example, the sector called agriculture. This sector had rules, policies, acts, and regulations for everything agriculture. Within the sector, every grain, fruit, herb, dairy, meat, livestock, spices, seasonings, vegetables, processed goods like butter, and so on, had their own policies. These policies focused on marketing, health hazards and standards, the selling price range for all goods, imports, exports, offenses and punishments for not following the law, and the list went on. For example, there were documents written on all laws involving apples. So each food item like tomatoes had their own separate documents and policies. That was how it was done on Earth, and that was how Landon wanted to do it here. Each fruit or food had their individual expiration dates, so it was only right to write their policies separately. There were also label requirements and regulations that had to be followed strictly for each food item. Landon had written documents on how long each food item could last, with and without chemical preservatives added to them. Anything that went to the market had to have an expiration date on it that showed when it was produced and when it would expire. He wanted the citizens to start getting health conscious as well. Right from July, the food industry had been adding chemical preservatives to most of the foods that they had produced. This drastically decreased the rate at which the foods turned bad, which was also a good thing. But still, without the aid of fridges or freezers, these food items still rotted away fast, as compared to if they were refrigerated. For now, the expiration labels would only show the expiration dates for all foods if they were not refrigerated. But once fridges came out, Landon would also revise the expiratory dates as well. Food labels also had to show what chemical preservative was added into the food, as well as safety hazards and signs like if it should be kept away from the eyes and so on. Also under this agriculture sector, there were policies on farm income protection, department mediation policies, insurance acts, and agricultural loans for people who wanted to start their own farming businesses. It also spoke about farming practices for land preservation and water. In fact, there were a ton of things that had been written under each sector alone. Even looking at the environmental sector, Landon had written policies on littering, deforestation, pollution, recycling, and waste management. He had quickly realized that he needed a waste and garbage management industry that would recycle containers and destroy all the garbage around Baymard. This industry would also be in charge of collecting all garbage from the garbage around Baymard. Generally, each sector would have a board, parliament, or council that discussed all topics and problems involved within that particular sector, like having a Supreme Court, Engineering, Research and Natural Science Council, Medical Board, Citizenship and Immigration Board, Labor Rights Board, Public Safety Board, Sports Board, Statistics Board, and so on. For example, the Statistics Board would basically collect, compile, analyze, and publish all statistics information related to commercial, industrial, financial, social, and economical activities in Baymard. They were also in charge of taking population consensus of the citizens, as well as doing several other government jobs. Also, Landon wanted to make a health and safety inspection board, which would be in charge of inspecting all industries and goods in Baymard. They would go to the industries and ensure that the goods that are marketed out to the citizens are not poisonous, expired, or harmful to consumers. They had to ensure that all industries had safety equipments and needs like ladders, as well as check restaurant cleanliness and so on. In future, Landon would also have them check all the drugs that were being kept in the hospitals and clinics. After all, they would be the main inspection team in Baymard. Landon and the men then proceeded to talk about the sector called benefits, which tackled public pensions, employment insurance benefits like maternity leaves, family benefits, education planning and student aid, disability benefits, housing benefits, payment plans, and so on. Overall, all three government officials were happy with the benefit sector. It showed them that when they themselves retired, they would not need to worry about food and other basic necessities. The important thing was that they wouldn't be seen as a burden to their children or grandchildren. They truly felt grateful to Landon for thinking about them in their old age. Back in Yoden, they had been working as government officials for several years now. And this was the first time that they had seen this type of policy. There was no other place within the Pino continent that gave such benefits. All of them came to Baymard with their families. So as they read through the policies, they began to put themselves in the shoes of those in need. If the ones in need were their own children or family members, wouldn't that be great? No one could predict the future, so having plans that tackled health and finance would be seen as heavenly to a lot of citizens, slaves, and refugees. Their king had taken everyone into account, even disabled people, as well as orphans and basically anyone who couldn't help themselves. They felt proud and blessed to be working under him. Once they were done with the benefits sector, they began talking about citizenship and immigration. Your Majesty, under the sector called Citizenship and Immigration, I think that we should reduce the number of days that visitors were allowed to stay in Baymard. Nicholas said, I agree, Your Majesty. Instead of 3 months, 90 days, let's make it 2 months. Benazir suggested. I propose that we make it 1 month, Craig said. Under the Citizenship and Immigration sector, Landon had made different rules for citizens, permanent residences, international students, visitors, and refugees. He had also detailedly explained how those who weren't citizens could become one. In future, Landon would allow people to come and study in Baymard, but they wouldn't be allowed to work here at all. He would only provide education, and once they were done, they had to leave the Baymard. These were dark times, empires were at war with each other, and everyone wanted power. How could he give his future enemies the chance to attack him? TSK. Wasn't that stupidity? If it were back on Earth, Landon would have no problem letting international students work in his industries, hospitals, or even join his military. But the times were different. He could only give them education, and that was it. And during the long holidays, they were to go back home to their empire. After all, knowledge was, and will always be, a human necessity for development. Back on Earth, Landon had been taught that basic knowledge should be free for all. Of course, being free doesn't mean that they won't pay their tuition. He could educate them, but it was what they did with all the acquired knowledge that made a difference. If Landon didn't give a detailed description of all industry processes to the men in Baymard, he was sure that they would still be experimenting each production process for each product for at least 5 years. Back on Earth, even when the first printing press was invented, it took another 40 years for mankind to improve that same printing press. Brew. So with education, he would let the international students get basic and intermediary knowledge. But the deep descriptions taught in the academies and industries were strictly off limits to them. He would teach and show them that chemical X is poisonous and chemical Y is toxic. But if they wanted to create their own goods like ink, they had to go back to their empires and combine what they thought were the raw materials with chemicals that they felt would aid in creating ink. It was their job to experiment back in their own empires. There was no way that they would get everything right without a detailed description. There were different reactions, catalysts, additives, and chemicals that did several things during production. And some of the main raw materials and components had to be taken from refined crude oil and other separate chemicals. So Landon was very sure that even if they mastered the entire periodic table and knew about reactions and isotopes, they would still need several years to get to where Baymard was presently at. Of course, in their chemistry classes, they would do basic laboratory experiments, but nothing that would reveal Baymard's industrial secrets. Please. If it were that easy, then all undergraduate students back on Earth would have their own mini-industries on the side, as well as cosmetic and other brand companies. If we're that easy, then everyone would also be able to produce medical drugs and other goods. Without the detailed description, one would need to research for several years. Back on Earth, companies would usually send their workers to other companies. They had exchange programs and internships so that their workers could learn the industry secrets from their competitors. It was generally allowed because Earth was somewhat peaceful. But in these times, for safety reasons, Landon didn't want them to work at the industries at all. In future maybe, but right now it was a definite no. Back to the matter of stays, the international students would get study permits while they studied in Baymard. If they really wanted to work, then they were only allowed to do so at stores, restaurants, or hotels during their short breaks. Of course, during the 4-month long break, they had to leave. In fact, they would only work in places that didn't have industry or work secrets. So basically, they couldn't work in the military and lower region. They could work within the coastal and central districts, as well as some parts of the upper region. But Landon could allow them to tour the industries with a tour access pass. They would be led by a tour guide, of course, and their tours would only take at most a few hours. On the other hand, visitors were those that would come for trade, enjoyment, or even those who came to treat their illnesses. Landon wanted the maximum stay for visitors to be 3 months. If they had a serious illness that needed surgery and 2 months of constant medical care, then they would get 3 months stamped on their tiny visa booklets. But if they came for a 1-week vacation, Landon would give them 2 weeks on their visa. At the end of their stay, if they were still within Baymard, they would be caught and banned from ever entering Baymard again. And if anyone needed an extension, they had to go to the main office and state their reasons, as well as bring evidence to support their claim. If the officers in charge deemed the evidence to be tangible, then their request would be approved. After Landon explained his reasons for having a maximum duration of 3 months for visitation, the 3 officials thoroughly understood and agreed on Landon's point. After all, it wasn't fair to let the sick or those in need of medical attention suffer, just because of their policies. Up next, they looked at the criminal justice sector. This sector aimed at victim rights, women rights, family violence, criminal conviction, human trafficking, rape, cannibalism, fraud, and so on. They also addressed the marital sector, which looked at the minimum marriage age, child support, abuse and neglect, spousal support, divorce, and separation laws. From the written laws, it was a crime to not provide food, schooling, housing, and clothing to children under the age of 15. After all, 15, in this era, was already considered to be an adult. If a family couldn't provide for their children, then they could apply for student loans, health loans, and so on. Also hitting a child, emotionally harming children, forcing marriage on children, sexually abusing them were all major crimes. Although 10-year-old children were abused and used as sex slaves in this era, Landon was thoroughly disgusted with the idea. Those citizens or refugees that were caught doing these would be locked up in prison for at least 10 years. And if it were visitors or international students, then they would be beaten up and permanently refused access into Baymard for the rest of their lives. Obviously, in the future, once the roads were all done and cars were made available, Landon would also add traffic and driving laws. As they looked at the court and justice rules and systems, Landon quickly realized that he needed to build an impenetrable prison for criminals. Any spy, enemy, or even criminal within the society needed to be kept in this prison. In future, he would also need to make prisoner rights and so on. Yes, the prisoners had rights too, like their visitation rights, phone call rights, basic food rights, lawyer rights, and so on. There was just too much to improve on. As the meeting progressed, they successfully went through several different sectors like federal land acquisition for businesses, sports, and medical policies, and finally concluded with taxes, which involved income taxes, payroll, and many more. 8 hours had gone by, with them taking 2 10-minute breaks and a 40-minute lunch break within the meeting. Once Chief Tim successfully created the printing press, they would start making identity cards for the citizens. Hence, at the end of their meeting, Landon quickly reminded them to start collecting all information about the citizens, such as age, date of birth, marriage status, and so on, as well as to also get a population census done as soon as possible. They had also agreed that every year, they would improve and update the policies as time went on. Plus, if the people gave feedback on Baymard's rules, policies, and regulations, then they would reflect on them and might even add them to the policies. But they would not approve rules that promoted violence, went against morality, or the people's needs and income, as well as the development of Baymard. It was only 5 p.m., so Landon decided to head on over to the food industry and aid in planting and transporting medicinal herbs from the farms to the greenhouse. As a king, his work never stopped. Snow powder has made its way to the continent of Pino, and will be revealed tonight at the Tenal auction house within the capital. Does host wishes to attend or watch through the system's monitors? Since the auction is not being held at the host's territory, then viewing through the monitor would cost host 45 development points, 80 technology points, or 15 bonus points. Likewise, attending the auction with a warping spell would also cost host 85 development points, 120 technology points, or 23 bonus points for 2 trips back and forth. And if host chooses to go, the system also offers a disguise package for 20 development points, 50 technology points, or 5 bonus points. Which option does host choose? The system said. Landon had been telling the system to alert him on any major developments that were happening around the Pino continent. It would be a shame to have an almighty system and not use it. Speaking of which, Landon found that his system was somewhat of a rude introvert. It would only talk to him if it was absolutely necessary. Occasionally, he would interact with the system before going to bed, or when he wanted to use the time capsules. And on a weekly basis, the system would nag him about completing his mission. Back to the matter of the auction, although Landon could use the system monitors, he had still decided to attend the auction instead. He had been cooped up in Baymard and felt that he should use this opportunity to observe the changes within Arcadina. I'll attend the auction with the disguise package, so use my development points for payment. As you wish, host. Jeanette walked into the auction house with her guards by side. As she walked, she couldn't help but remember the conversations that she had been having with her father and her mother within these past few weeks. Her dream of becoming the first queen in the continent was ruined by that strong man ****** Penelope. How dare she snatch her dreams of becoming the first female ruler within the Pino continent? And to make matters worse, when she had proposed the idea of her being queen, her father literally told her to get out. Why was Penelope's case different from hers? Wasn't she smart, cunning, and beautiful as well? Wasn't she royalty, and a good manipulator as well? Jeanette had heard the tales of Penelope, and had instantly called it bullsh****. Who would go out of their way to help peasants if they didn't want something from them in return? HMMP. For her, Penelope was a grand manipulator. A person that could make all the men around her favor her was something that a seductress was good at, and she wholeheartedly believed that Penelope was such a person. Jeanette being a master in the act of white lotusing, how could she believe that Penelope was that pure and innocent? When she asked her mother for help, her mother had immediately told her to get rid of what she called silly dreams. Her mother had been preparing her blood brother James to take the throne from Eli. So how could she entertain her daughter's fantasy dreams? Jeanette was utterly disappointed in her mother. Why did it seem like her mother loved her younger brother more than she did for her? Anyway, she had already made up her mind. Now that all 3 of her brothers had gone to fight at the borders, she would use this period to kill her father and sit on the throne, with or without her mother's help. The good thing was that she had a whole 8 months to get the job done. Her brothers had just left 2 weeks ago, and it would take them a little over 2 months to arrive at the borders, plus another 4 months, in which they had to fight and stay within those border cities, until they were sure that the Terike Knights wouldn't attack the cities anymore or call for reinforcements. And after that period, her brothers would use another 2 months to head back to the capital on horse. All this left Jeanette with enough time to plan her father's downfall. She could attack any time with the 8-month period. Hence she decided that after her wedding in November, she would attack the old dog and take her place as Queen of Arcadina. Hee. Just thinking about it made her smile. That was why she had been looking for ways to improve her forces, as well as increase their numbers. A few days ago, she had heard that 2 new products had arrived from the continent of Morgany. In this world called Hertfilia, there were 9 continents, but the people from the Pino continent only knew of 4. These 4 were the ones that they would sometimes do trades with. From these trades, the people on the Pino continent had realized that 3 of those continents were somewhat backwards in development. But the continent called Morgany was more or less the same as them in terms of civilization. Traveling ships would usually take several months to move from one continent to another. Hence trade opportunities and goods from there were seen as treasures. Who didn't like international goods? She had come today because of 2 products. One was a liquid beauty potion that was rumored to make any woman's skin glow. And the final item was something called snow powder. The merchants from Morgany had said that snow powder was only discovered within the last year. Apparently some alchemist called Endo discovered it by accident, as well as received some injuries from it from the accident. Isn't this what she had been looking for? If she could get some of this snow powder, wouldn't she be able to deal with her father instantly? No matter how much it costs, she had to get her hands on these godly products. As she walked in, she immediately spotted one of her nemesis, Angelina Dwight, the B***ch that had always tried to seduce her fiancé. Why was she here? Did she come here to buy the beauty potion as well? No. There was no way in hell that she would let this SL** get the potion. Although she had finally gotten engaged, she was still insecure when it came to her man. What man wouldn't want a beauty? Men were allowed to take as many wives as they wanted, so she was afraid that he would eventually take that B***h as a concubine. No matter what, she had to get her hands on that beauty potion before Angelina did. The guests all came in and took their seats. Of course, some were VIP members who had their own private booths as well. Some guests wore masks, while others came with no disguises. As for Landon, he had gotten a VIP booth by altering the memories of the auction house managers. To them, Landon was a renowned merchant from the northern part of the empire. Speaking of snow powder, it was basically the watered-down version of gunpowder. Landon wasn't surprised that it was invented around this period. Back on Earth, China was the first to invent snow powder in the late 8th century. And between the 10th to 13th century, Chinese goods made their way to other Asian countries, Europe, the Middle East, and other parts of the world. Alchemists tried their best to copy and make their own explosives, as well as take several trips to China so as to further study these explosives. What Landon wanted to know was the strength of powder's explosive power. Once the host came on stage, the room instantly quieted down. Welcome, esteemed guests. Today's auction only entails goods from the continent of Morgany. Up first, let's start with what the Morgany continent calls horseshoes. The entire audience was shocked. Why would horses need shoes? Was it some sort of fashion statement? I know what you all are thinking, but these shoes could allow the horses to travel for long distances, without their feet getting injured. Once the men heard the host's explanation, their eyes instantly lit up. It might seem like a trivial matter, but in actuality, it was not. All these men were either nobility like the barons, knights, merchants, and so on. Some of them had gone on secret missions that made them take tricky roads and even paths around the forests. On their journey, short dried-up stalks of grass would sometimes prick their horses' feet. And even on the roads, they would be pieces of wood or sharp rocks that could cause splinters for the horses. No matter how tough the feet, hooves of a horse were, if they stepped on something that was similar to a needle, then they would feel immense pain. So basically, horseshoes protected their feet the same way shoes protected human feet. Without shoes, it would be very painful and stressful for human beings to run, or even walk on rocks or other terrains for long distances. Generally, if a horse was domesticated and only stayed within a stable or estate, then they didn't really need horseshoes. But if the people were going to use them in pulling carriages for hours and taking something like a continuous 2-month journey, then they definitely needed them. And in this era, nobody kept horses just for the sake of pampering. Horses were treated like cars since they pulled carriages. They were also seen as war necessities, since they also pulled wagons filled with war supplies and equipments. Plus, they also carried the knights on their backs constantly. Merchants and travelers also used horses on a daily basis, so everyone was somewhat interested in these horseshoes. Some of the men seated within the audience had paused their journey for several days whenever their horses were injured. At times, it could thoroughly disrupt a mission or even supply of goods. But now, with the help of these horseshoes, they could finally go about their journey without the fear of delaying their schedules. As the host spoke on the importance of the horseshoes, an auction worker came to the stage and handed him several parchment papers. The design sketches, blueprints for horseshoe production and fitting will be auctioned out today, and the buyer will also receive 2 samples of these horseshoes. Now, let's start bidding, shall we? 10,000 silver coins for everything. 13,000 silver coins. 50,000 silver coins. Underfer. Several men fought to win the bid. And at the end, it was finally sold to an influential merchant, who probably wanted to capitalize on the horseshoes and make profits from it. As for Landon, he didn't really need horseshoes because all his wars would probably be fought around Baymard's city walls. Plus, in the future, he would use things like machine guns, military all-tanks, and so on. Hence, his horses would probably end up being domesticated. But if he really needed to leave Baymard with his knights, he would probably make these horseshoes and keep up appearances by using the horses. Up next is a beauty potion that would make any woman look 10 years younger. This potion was made by the renowned alchemist Lupio. I'm sure you all have heard of his fame and deeds within the continent of Morgany. As the host spoke, the women in the audience became more and more excited. Who didn't know the renowned alchemist Lupio? His products had been marketed within the Pino continent for the past few years now. From charcoal eyeliners on sticks to thick liquidy paste substances that reduced eye puffiness once the women woke up to other products. In short, alchemist Lupio's products were focused on the needs and necessities of women. Once the bidding war began, the women looked at each other as if they were enemies on a battlefield. 15,000 silver coins, someone yelled. 18,000 silver coins. 23,000. Underfer. 50,000 silver coins. A servant from Jeanette's booth said. 55,000 silver coins. Angelina's servant seconded. Jeanette immediately looked at Angelina's booth with rage. The booths were kind of like high balcony seats at an opera show. Every VIP had a mini balcony and could also see the other VIP members on their balconies. They also had megaphones so that they, or their servants, could yell out their price. Angelina smirked as she looked at Jeanette, who was just a balcony away from her. In fact, they were so close to each other that they could literally have a conversation amongst themselves. 70,000 silver coins, Jeanette's servant yelled out. 75,000 silver coins, Angelina's servant seconded again. Jeanette was fuming mad. Be ***h. You're doing it on purpose. Whatever do you mean? Isn't this an auction house? Don't I have the right to bid as well? Or do you think that just because you're a princess, I should stop bidding? Angelina responded. Jeanette's face started to twist as she tried very hard to control her emotions. She immediately made up her mind that once she became queen, this SL*** would be the first one to go. Swore that she would definitely burn the B****h down and pee on her grave. I suggest you cut the crap. Since I as a royal princess is bidding, then you should at least give me some face. Normally, Jeanette could easily deal with anyone and keep her White Lotus act intact, but when she was dealing with Angelina, a White Lotus grandmaster, she as an ordinary master, lost tragically. Whenever she met with Angelina, her true self would always show. Angelina felt the same way as well. She was always seen as weak and helpless, but when she clashed with Jeanette, she became to a tigress. Angelina smirked as she looked at Jeanette's scrunched-up face. Face? Why didn't you give me some face as well? My aunt is the official wife of your father. So technically, I too am part of royalty. So why should I give you face when you clearly don't care about mine? And by the way, why are you here bidding for this beauty potion? Have you finally come to terms with the fact that your appearance is hideous? TSK. I'm actually surprised that it took you so long to grow a brain. I hope that now you've finally realized that your ugly face and body doesn't deserve to be tied up with Brother Anthony, Angelina said. Hideous? Her, Jeanette Barn, hideous? She knew that this slut Angelina had plans of using this beauty potion to take her man. Over her dead body, Landon and a few people who had their VIP balconies around both women leaned in and began watching their cat fight. Landon really wished that he had brought popcorn for the show. He had to admit, this Angelina had a sharp tongue. Can't you at least show some respect? Jeanette yelled. Angelina tilted her head and slowly looked at Jeanette from head to toe. Show some respect. To who? In my eyes, you are nothing but a royal, irresponsible, and senseless harlot. You're just a dog in heat. Those around them almost coughed out blood. This girl was indeed savage. At this point, Landon ped Jeanette as he looked at her red raging face. Rest in peace, elder sister. You're too much. Aren't you just jealous of me? Ha ha ha. Hi, Angelina, jealous of you. My dear royal harlot. Jealousy is an unsightly and ugly thing. And so are you in that dress. Underfer. The bidding ended with Jeanette finally winning. But before she could rejoice, Demoness Angelina spoiled her victory. Can I give you some advice? Angelina asked. Since Jeanette had won, all her previous anger had long dissipated. So she decided to listen to whatever boolsh *** Angelina had to say. Advice? Yeah, sure, go ahead, Jeanette said while gloating. An ugly person will always be an ugly person. So when you use the beauty potion, don't await a miracle. As the auction progressed, Landon continued observing all the items displayed. So far, all the items weren't really impressive to him. But to these people, these goods were mind-blowing. There were a lot of pottery items that showed the art style of the people of Morgany, as well as new goods like horse saddles, unique clothing items, and so on. Finally, it was time for the last item on the list to be auctioned off. This item that had brought everyone out today. Even spies and assassins were seated within the crowd, including those from the ghostly prince's side. It was finally time for the big reveal. Esteemed guests, for our final item, we have what is popularly known within the Morgany continent as snow powder. For better understanding, we decided to show you all what it could do. Immediately, an auction worker came up to the stage with a wooden boards, some tubes, ropes, sticks, snow powder, arrows, and bows. For the first setup, several sticks were tied together in the shape of triangles and mounted to the ground. The auction worker made 2 triangular stick stands and placed a long, large stick above both triangular mounts. It was kind of like 2 camera tripod stands that had a stick placed on top of them. This long stick connected both tripods. Each tripod stick stand had 3 legs that formed a triangle and stood mounted to the ground. One end of a large long stick was placed on top of the first tripod stick stand, while the other end of the stick was placed on the second stand. Once that setup was done, the worker then filled a tiny tube with snow powder, placed the tube on one end of the long stick, and aimed at a wooden board a little distance away from the setup. The tube had about the same size as handheld dynamite sticks back on Earth. When everything was ready, another worker quickly brought a fire torch and lit the tube. Once it was shot, white smoke instantly began to fill the stage. Boom! 1/4 of the board was shattered into pieces. Everyone was shocked. Even the calm and collected spies and assassins almost stood up from their seats. What kind of weapon was this? This was groundbreaking technology that would definitely help them in their quest for power. Jeanette was brimming with joy. This was exactly what she was looking for. With this, her victory was definitely guaranteed. She would kill her old man, as well as that be *** Angelina. As for Landon, he had realized that the explosive power was not even up to 20% of his gunpowder back in Baymard. It was understandable, since the people didn't necessarily understand science. For these people, if they combined several stones with charcoal, then gunpowder would be formed. But that wasn't necessarily the right way to go about it. For example, most of these rocks only contain maybe 30 to 50% sulfur within them, and the other components were seen as impurities. So since these people didn't understand chemistry, or even knew what sulfur was, how could they succeed in creating any powerful explosions? If they wanted to have a good explosive power, then they needed to use at least 98% pure sulfur. And the same thought process went out for the other raw materials. That was why chemical extraction and preparation was necessary. Another important factor was that they didn't know the ratio in which they should mix the raw materials. Back in Baymard, Landon had made several potion cups, containers, and glass dishes, which were used by the people to estimate the ratio. The correct ratio was 2 parts pure sulfur, 3 parts charcoal, and 13 parts pure saltpeter. These cups and containers were now used even in cooking. People could say things like, add 3 parts rice, 4 parts water, and so on. Once the right ratios were properly mixed, Landon had the men fill sacks of gunpowder and place in the storage rooms. Apart from the people in Baymard, the rest of the world didn't know the ratio and just went with what they thought was right. In fact, there were so many reasons why their explosive power was weak. Heck, it sounded more like a loud fart than a thunderous clap. And from the looks of it, those around the shots weren't even affected by the explosive force from the shot. Well, this was definitely good for Baymard. Back on Earth, handheld cannons were generally made between the 12th and 14th centuries. And even at that time period, gunpowder still had a weak explosive power. But when the era of science and all the geniuses like Albert Einstein came about, people started understanding where they went wrong with gunpowder. The era of science mainly happened between the late 16th to 20th century. People started building large gigantic cannons, war machines, and gunpowder guns. But presently, sticks were used to launch the gunpowder-filled tubes at an inclined angle, as well as attached some of these gunpowder-filled tubes onto metal arrows and used their bows to launch their attacks. These kind of weapons would never be enough to destroy Baymard's walls. That's why Landon could sigh from relief. Within the audience, King Barn had also disguised himself as a VIP merchant. This snow powder was what he needed to prepare himself against City Lord Shannon's attack on him. He had been having several sleepless nights since the disappearance of City Lord Shannon. If the fool really planned on attacking him, then he would use this gunpowder to completely destroy Shannon. For now, once he got the powder, he would get his alchemists to study and create large-scale batches. And if anyone got in his way of obtaining this powder, that person would wish that they had never been born. My esteemed guests, we have only 50 large sacks of snow powder being auctioned off today. One had to know that this powder was extremely expensive, so the merchants couldn't bring a lot back from the continent of Morgany. These sacks would be sold in groups of 5. So let's start the bidding for the first group, shall we? Once everyone had seen the effectiveness of snow powder, they started bidding like crazy. 40,000 silver coins, 70,000 silver coins, 100,000 silver coins. Underfer. Landon also decided to bid as well. It wasn't that he needed the powder, but he was basically targeting those that had bullied the old Landon. Back in the days, several nobles and their children would laugh at him, trip him over, and even pour water or food over his head. They basically treated him like a clown for their own amusement. And other times, they would beat him up badly, all in the name of practice. Presently, most of these nobles had come to the auction with their sons. So once Petty Landon saw the boys who used to bully him, he immediately started making things difficult for them. 120,000 silver coins. 120,001 silver coins. Minister Frederick and his son Moam looked at the mysterious man who seemed to be making things difficult for them. From the man's height and body structure, Minister Frederick could somewhat guess that this stranger should be around the same age as his son Moam. But when had he offended the stranger? Why was this man hell-bent on annoying him? HMMP. It didn't matter what the stranger thought. Today, no one could stop him from getting this snow powder. Since this stranger wanted to make a fool out of him, then he would just raise the price to a ridiculous amount. At the end, let's see who will have the last laugh, he thought. This booth will bid 700,000 silver coins. Those who had smaller budgets almost began crying. How did the bidding move from 200,000 silver coins to 700,000 in a blink of an eye? Minister Frederick, aren't you just bragging about your wealth at this point? What was the point in having such a huge price jump? Won't the prices eventually go up with time? At least give some of us the opportunity to have hope. Minister Frederick smiled provocatively as he looked at Landon. Boy, your year's too young and inexperienced to make me suffer a loss. All those nobles that were in the upper echelon of nobility understood that Minister Frederick was having a battle with the mysterious stranger. It would definitely be better to sit this one out. Even if they wanted to continue bidding, they were sure that Minister Frederick would most likely bid to the very end. As for the other nobles, they could only sigh as they knew that they wouldn't be getting this first batch of snow powder. Some of these nobles weren't as rich or popular like Minister Frederick. Even within nobility, there were different groups of classes. There were noble families, people whose names were once a symbol of power. But as the years went by, these families had lost their power and support within the empire. There were also nobles that had once angered the king and, of course, had their forces cut down by half. But then again, there were nobles like Minister Frederick, who were filthy rich and could easily get anything that they desired. It was definitely better to let the super-rich Frederick take this first batch. In that way, the other nobles wouldn't need to worry about him bidding later on. We have a bid of 700,000 silver coins going once. Going. As the host spoke, Moam looked at Landon and snorted. One should know their own limits, HMMP. Truly a toad that claims to be a phoenix. Everyone looked at the calm and collected stranger and thought that he had given up. And just when the host was about to close the bidding, Landon interrupted. Going twice, going thrice. 700,001 silver coins. Undersir. The audience immediately quieted down. Minister Frederick and his son shot death stares at Landon. Such a bid was an obvious insult. What was the aim of adding the extra silver coin at the end? For heaven's sake, what would the auction house do with that extra 1 silver coin? If Landon had known their thoughts, he would simply retort back and tell them that, for one to become a millionaire, every single coin mattered. Even if one had 999,999 coins, without the extra 1 coin, it could never be $1,000,000. Or so Bill Gates said back on Earth. Minister Frederick was so angry that he seized the megaphone from his servant and continued bidding. 800,000 silver coins. 800,001 silver coins. 850,000 silver coins. 850,001 silver coins. Undersir. Since the amount wasn't enough to allow him to withdraw from the bidding, Frederick calmed himself down and continued on. Since our young mysterious friend here is truly generous by adding 1 silver to his bids, then I would like to bid 1.3 million silver coins. Frederick and Moam lifted their proud chins and sneered at Landon. But of course, their victory was indeed short-lasted. 1.3 million and 5 silver coins. Immediately, the smiles on the faces of the father and son duo instantly dropped. What sort of troublesome person was this? In fact, everyone had the same idea as well. Fine. You want a bid, that's naturally all right. But you increased the price by only 5 silver coins? Are you really normal? Previously, you had added 1 silver coin, and now it's 5. Do you really think that we should acknowledge you just because you added a few more silver coins? Don't you have any shame? Damn it. Both father and son got up from his seat angrily and faced Landon. Moams was so angry that his face became as red as a tomato. How dare this scoundrel compete with his father? 2 million silver coins. 2 million and 5 silver coins. 2.2 million silver coins. 2.2 million and 5 silver coins. Undersir. As they continued bidding, several nobles couldn't help but think. As expected, Minister Frederick is indeed a wealthy man. At the end, Frederick had used 3.7 million silver coins to buy the first 5 bags of snow powder. Although the father and son duo had won, their egos had been wounded by the mysterious stranger, who didn't know their family status and situation within the empire. They were one of the top richest and powerful families in Arcadina. Frederick's sister had married King Barn and was the first and official wife of the king. His nephew was also the crown prince, Eli. Hence he had gained a lot of finance and power all through the years. For someone to go against him meant that they also went against his sister, the queen. And to make matters worse, both father and son felt that the stranger had simply been playing with them all along. Their hearts were burning with a strong desire to kill the bastard. So as the auction continued, they began to quickly devise a plan for their newfound friend. They had decided that once the stranger stepped out of the auction house, they and their men would immediately slice him into several pieces. Frederick knew that if he didn't kill this bastard, people would be laughing and making fun of him from the shadows. He had to admit, this stranger had really made him eat dog shit today. In fact, most of the people within the audience knew that this stranger wouldn't last another day, since he had offended the great Minister Frederick. Once the auction was over, Minister Frederick and his men followed the mysterious stranger to a dark alley. But once they got there, they soon realized that the stranger was nowhere to be found. It was like he had just vanished into thin air. They immediately went back to the auction house and asked about the man's identity. But sadly, even the managers there didn't know who he was or where he stayed. This was really too strange. Just who could that mysterious stranger be?